again, and for this time giving evidence in public. And my apologies for the late start. Obviously, with the division happening around 2:20, it has delayed a number of members. So I'm sure you will understand. We unfortunately were not in session when the division was called, so we couldn't suspend the committee. We had to just wait to start late, which is a frustration. But I'm sure you understand and appreciate it. And as I say, I do appreciate you coming again to give us evidence. We must admit, when we asked if you could come, we did think there may have been more changes to the way our business was conducted in the chamber, but clearly the decision of the Commission on Monday to stick with 2 metres has meant that the changes we were perhaps envisaging having to analyse today have not happened. But I wonder if you could start, and we have seen the leader this morning. I know you've not had a chance to hear the evidence, but there will be a transcript on Hansard as soon as it's available and on the committee website. But I wonder if you could start by perhaps explaining to the committee the reasoning behind the Commission's decision to stick with a 2-metre rule in the House of Commons chamber.
Thank you, Chair. And just for the record, I'm John Benger, the Clerk of the House. And this is my colleague Matthew Hanlon.
My apologies, we don't have name plates we normally have.
So the Commission had a paper from Public Health England and an oral briefing from a senior official on Public Health England. And it was explained to members of the Commission the implications of 1 metre-plus. So all of the emphasis is what plus involved. Everyone knows what a metre is, but what 1 metre-plus is in the context of the Chamber and committees is more complicated. And indeed, the official from Public Health England made the point that the Chamber is a particularly complicated space. It is a public space where already quite a large number of people are there. It has ventilation, air conditioning, people are coming in and out, and there are a number of people who can't move. So the mitigations that you would need to secure to deliver the plus element were things such as face masks, glass screens, which would probably go around 3 sides, perspex screens, sorry, thank you, Matthew, 3 sides of the member, boxing them in, members not standing to deliver speeches because that increases the area in which the virus could be transmitted if anyone was carrying it, and not even speaking loudly. Any form of shouting is an aggravating factor. So faced with those scenarios, the Commission didn't really feel that the rather limited number of additional members you'd get with 1 metre-plus justified those quite extreme actions. But they did ask me to go away and look at bill committee rooms to see whether those mitigations might be, or at least some of those mitigations, not I think face masks, but certainly the boxing, we might be more appropriate in a bill committee than in the chamber.
Thank you very much, Dr. Benjamin. Matthew, would you like to come in as well?
Well, I obviously wasn't at the Commission meeting, so John is the expert on that, so I don't really have anything to add to that.
I mean, I think we have concern because, as you rightly say, it's a very complicated public space, but it is the most visible public space and workspace probably in the country. And Suzanne Webb has some questions on that topic.
I think some of this has been answered, but I just want to explore more about what factors were taken into consideration to not implement the 1 metre rule. And I think you've explained some reasoning in there. But I guess from my point of view, I'm looking at the fact that we should be setting an example to everybody out there and employers and employees in terms of how we monitor and manage this 1 metre-plus. So is there any detail on that?
I think that I have to be aware as corporate officer of risk, and the Speaker has been extremely consistent throughout the coronavirus crisis that he will be guided at every step by Public Health England advice, and he's left no one in any doubt about that. So we are doing our best, obviously, to maximise all the functions of Parliament to the best of our ability, and I take very seriously the fact that the country needs to see Parliament in action, and we got the Parliament in action really, really quickly, even when the COVID crisis was at a much higher pitch in terms of rates of transmission. But I don't think that my own view is that it would not be appropriate for Parliament to set an example which breached the public health guidelines that the rest of the country was being asked to operate under. I think that would be a rather perverse example, actually.
So I fully understand the risk aspect to it. So was the advice actually in writing from Public Health England in terms of how we should manage our operations here?
Yes, I think as of this morning we cleared a memorandum from Public Health England to the committee which sets out the basics. I'd have to say that was added to by the oral briefing from a senior official in Public Health England. So what I've told you, I think, is a fairly accurate summary of the discussion that took place in the Commission, and I think some of that information is in the document you have, and some of it came in oral briefing.
Because there's just one aspect, if I may raise,
yeah.
is the fact that in the Chamber we're all forward-facing, so we're always looking onto someone's back, and certainly the distance between the government benches and the opposition benches are more than 2 metres.
So that's definitely a mitigating factor that people are, and this was taken into account. That is seen as a mitigating factor, but it is not a sufficiently mitigating factor in terms of the projection potentially of particles over a range. I think that members of the Commission, obviously I didn't, this is really a politician's decision, and the members of the Commission didn't engage in the discussion. This was really a matter for the members, I think. The idea of people sitting down to deliver speeches, the idea of people speaking quietly into a lapel microphone, and even the sound system in the chamber is very complex. I think I mentioned this last time I came to the committee. It's a very sophisticated system. I'm not convinced that everyone having a lapel mic in the chamber would work, and I certainly think that the atmosphere, which I know a number of members think is a little too calm in some ways, would be even more subdued. So the Commission, to be honest, didn't agonise over it. They saw it as a fairly clear decision at this stage. But obviously, this is a dynamic situation which may well change when we come back from the summer adjournment, and then we'll look at it again, I'm sure.
Okay, that answers just the follow-up question, was actually when this will be reviewed.
Yeah.
Okay.
Chris Chope now has a question. You need to unmute yourself, Sir Christopher. Can someone unmute Sir Christopher?
Okay, yes, I can.
He's unmuted.
In my unmuted state. Okay. Can I ask the clerk whether the exact words of the advice, the written advice from Public Health England, are available to the committee? He refers to a memorandum, which sounds as though it's précis rather than the actual document. Is there any reason why we can't see the actual document? And is there any reason also why we can't see effectively a transcript or a very full note of the discussion that took place at the Commission meeting?
I think you'd have to apply to the Commission for that. I'm not able to divulge Commission documents. There isn't a formal transcript kept of Commission meetings, so there's not like a he said, she said transcript. That's I think never been the case for Commission meetings as far as I'm aware. I think that the Public Health England advice was written at great pace to give something to the Commission meeting in time for a meeting on Monday morning. And I think certainly the gist of it, the bulk of it, is in the document that's before the committee, which was then I've tried to give you as full I'm confident I've not missed anything out that the Commission discussed, if you see what I mean, by referring to the oral briefing, which was at least as important as anything in the written briefing. And members of the Commission were able to ask the official from Public Health England to amplify particular points, for example, on the relative merits of standing and seating, which may or may not have been in the memorandum you get, but was certainly something he mentioned. But I'm confident you have before you, in what I've said, everything relevant that was before the Commission.
But is there any reason why we can't actually see the unexpurgated version of the evidence that was given, the written evidence given by Public Health England? And perhaps you could let us know the name of the official.
So the official was John Simpson from Public Health England. And I think you'd need to apply to the Speaker as chair of the Commission if you want to see the any earlier version of the papers that came before the Commission. But they are, I promise you that, at least in my view, there's nothing between what you've got now and what I've told you now. I don't believe there's anything significant missing. But I mean, of course, you must make your own judgment on that.
But the reason I'm asking these questions is not just for the benefit of members of Parliament, but potentially, for example, theatres that are thinking of reopening.
Yes.
And the issue of the projection of people who are using their voice to reach members of the audience. So that's why I'm asking about this. But what role does this have with Public Health England?
I missed the last bit. Sorry, Christopher.
What role does John Simpson have with Public Health England? What is his status?
I'd have to supply. He's a senior official in Public Health England, but I don't know his exact title, I'm afraid, and we can supply that to you.
And
the point you make about public spaces is very well made. My understanding is there's very specific guidance to a range of businesses and organisations, and there's also guidance forthcoming, I think, very shortly for employers, which we'll certainly be looking at very carefully when that comes out, and I gather that's imminent.
But it is only guidance, of course, isn't it?
Yes.
So that means that so far as reasonably practicable comes into play.
I think we had this discussion last time, actually. I think I said to you that Parliament can essentially do what it likes as long as it stays, kind of within the law, although it tries to follow best practice in health and safety at all times. But yes, this is guidance.
Okay, so just to finish it off, I mean, what do you recommend we should do in order to be able to get a copy of this actual document? Have we got to write to the Speaker, or...?
Yes, I think you should write to the Speaker as chair of the Commission.
And the earlier advice that was given by Public Health England, was that also in writing as well?
So I thought that's what we were talking about. The later, the cleaned up version is what you've got. I don't think it essentially misses out anything in great detail. It's just that some of that material they dealt with more orally than in writing.
I think.
Thank you.
I think Christopher's talking about the earlier advice from Public Health England that originally.
That was contained in the Speaker's letter. There were no germane differences. I don't know whether there was any written advice that preceded that, but I know that was absolutely all the relevant advice was in that letter.
Thank you, Dr. Bennett. I think what we may do is consider writing as a committee to the Speaker, perhaps, so that there's full visibility on this. It just raises a couple of other points. We did talk last time you came about the difficulties of using the galleries and the microphone system. Yeah. I wonder if there's any further work being done on that, because it does feel as if now the government guidance has moved to 1 metre+, but we still are unable to move to 1 metre+ in the chamber. We maybe have to think about this being slightly longer term than any of us hoped for. And the other question which we always have to ask is to ensure that the staff who work in the House of Commons are fully protected. And I think this point about speaking and the longer distance that maybe the particles can travel if one is speaking loudly and standing up may be something that we would want to make sure that the staff have full protection and are not being exposed in an unnecessary way.
So the advice I've had from our broadcasting team is that it would be quite a significant operation to make those spaces viewable by the fixed cameras in the chamber and the very complex sound system, but not impossible. What I would say is that those spaces seem to be being used very well to me by members as a sort of subs bench to come off when other people leave the chamber. So we almost need that, really. because it's very important we keep a flow of people. If you've looked at some of the call lists for statements, you know, we can have 50 names on that call list, and they're obviously not all in the chamber at the same time. So to keep people somewhere where they can nip into the choir of the chamber and know when they're ready to move in and other people move out seems to me to be quite advantageous.
No, that's very helpful, thank you. We're now going to go on to use of other parts of the palace and the 1 metre plus rule, and Bambos Charalambous has some questions on that.
My question is about the general committee rooms. So I'm currently on a bill committee, and we've used the Boothroyd room, but also we've used committee room 10. But we still have to practice social distancing. It was easier in committee room 10, but not in the Boothroyd room. I just wondered if you had any thoughts about whether the 1 metre plus could be better applied in those rooms, and other committee rooms as well.
We're just doing a bit of work on this right now, and I think it could. I think if you go and look in committee room 6, I've got a picture of it here. There's an example of what a boxed screen would look like with members. Looks a bit like a sort of old-fashioned bank with screens on either side. So we could, using those screens and using 1 metre plus, I believe we could, first of all, bring more rooms into play, and secondly, potentially boost the numbers of members on each committee who could take part. So at the moment, I imagine you'll find only, I think, a couple of the rooms really work with 2 metres and most members of the committee actually in the main area, and the other rooms have members sort of sitting in the background and coming in for their bit, or sort of almost a form of unofficial pairing whilst maintaining quorum. So we are looking into that, and I think with some mitigations put in, we can get to the stage by September, which is when we've been asked to get to this stage, where we could potentially run up to half a dozen PBCs in rooms, and the more mitigations we put in, the more of those rooms can have a larger number of members in them. But let's not pretend this is still back to normal. Public bill committees on big bills in the past have had much higher numbers of members in certain circumstances. So we're still, as we are with all of this thing, we're having to adapt and modify and compromise to try and keep the show on the road as best we can.
And obviously, my comments were also about the select committee rooms, which tend to be rooms such as this one. And I just wondered if there's any modifications. I mean, obviously we're having a bit of a hybrid system here today.
So the hybrid arrangements for select committees, I think, are done under the authority of the Speaker, the extension of them. And they seem, the feedback I've had from colleagues in the committee offices, it seems to be working very well, is the general feeling. Well, as we're seeing today. So I've not had any pressure to modify those arrangements transmitted to me so far.
So, do you think there's any need for any changes in procedure?
I would have thought not at this stage. Are you aware of any, Matthew?
I would just add, Chair, that the difference between select committees and general committees, of course, is that select committees can make use of remote participation, which means there is less pressure on space, which means more rooms are usable for committees like this. General committees don't have that facility, so the difficulty is finding enough committee rooms. Some work has been done, as John said, with colleagues in the Public Bill Office and in the in-house services team to work out what we need to do. We could, given a couple of weeks and, frankly, sourcing all the perspecs we need, create enough rooms to run properly social distance 1 metre plus bill committees regularly in more rooms than we have now, which, as John says, would get us up to the potential of having 6 concurrent bill committees, what we've been asked to provide for. But as I say, it literally takes a bit of time to build the spaces.
And can I ask about yourselves, like when you're at the table that's in the chamber, about social distancing there, because obviously that's quite problematic with front benchers coming out on the whips and the speaker.
Matthew does table duty too, and on the whole, I found it pretty good. The gaps are measured quite precisely, so there shouldn't be people near us. We're far enough away from the occupant of the chair. Inevitably, people need advice from the table. They are asked to email it. We do monitor the inboxes very carefully. We get notes shoved across the table. It's fine, actually. It doesn't feel, to me, particularly risky. Members, I'm glad to say, don't come and sort of whisper in your ear as they used to. One thing the Speaker has noticed is that on occasions, members are actually huddled around the edges. This may be quick conversations you need, and I completely understand, why that might be necessary, but he makes the point that the nation does see that, and he typically gets letters and emails whenever anyone notices that happening. So I think it's something we should be mindful of. But I've not personally had a problem with it, Matthew.
I think in the last couple of months I can only think of one occasion when I felt a member was uncomfortably close, and it was only very brief. I think there's an issue here about how long we were in close proximity to someone. I don't think it was just there was a last-minute excitement about which vote people were going to. It was a really complicated procedural moment involving backbench members who were very passionate, rightly, about amendments to a bill, and we all certainly, like members, just fell back into the standard practice of rushing around the table and sort of, because he was convinced he was about to get something completely wrong. So I had enormous sympathy for the position he was in. And I did find myself slightly shrinking back, but I said that was 10 seconds or so. Most of the time, we got quite good at sort of having hissed conversations with the whip on the front bench.
And it's just a small point. Do you find the adjournments help in that as well?
The little suspensions are really useful, I think, and the Speaker's kept those going. Sometimes we can dispense with them when the chamber's very empty, but we like to wipe down the dispatch boxes just as we've done here, which are an area of physical contact and spittle and so on. So it's also very useful for table clerks and other officials to do a quick hand around without it being obtrusive.
I mean, normally the drill is, even when there are two of us there at once, we'd normally do a handover at the table. Obviously very close together and whispering. If you've got even a couple of minutes, you can stand well apart behind the Speaker's chair and say 3 things to know about that are about to happen, and then we can go on giving, I hope, reasonably seamless advice to the chair. But so those couple of minutes, even when it's only a couple of minutes, can be very useful.
Thank you. Liz Twist, I think, wanted to come in on virtual public bill committees.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. I just wanted to ask about whether there have been any more consideration or discussion with the leader about virtual bill committees, which some of us took part in a test of and seemed quite successful. And I just wondered what your thoughts were on that and whether there had been any detailed discussion.
There's been no such discussion. I don't think we have had any indication that the leader was anxious to pursue that option at the moment. So a little bit of work was done on it, and I remember those experiments being done, but we've got no suggestion that the government, who'd need to table the relevant motion, are keen to pursue that. Frankly, from a practical and technical point of view, it is easier in many ways to run public bill committees physically. It is a complicated process with lots of transactions, lots of interruptions, moving of amendments, withdrawing of amendments and things. All of it is perfectly possible. You could definitely do it virtually. But from the point of view of, for example, Hansard, they would find it easier to do a PBC physically than virtually.
Okay, I just ask because we've talked before about the capacity of the various committee rooms to hold full meeting, public bill committee meetings.
So
I believe that there's not all of them are capable of holding the full.
So I think it's really helpful to have an opportunity to clarify this. The main constraint about increasing the number of simultaneous public bill committees we have is not physical room space. Public bill committees, probably more than any other proceeding, require high numbers of specialised staff, specialised software, specialised equipment. Whereas on committees we have a large number of staff who've been in the committee office who could swap around between committees if they needed to. You can't just have a go at clerking a public build committee. Public build procedure is quite complicated. And of course people pick it up quite quickly, but it's a sort of much longer training period than it would be even, for example, to edit questions in the table office. The software that's used to produce amendments is specialist software which you need to be trained to use. It's very complicated actually. It's not written in Microsoft Word. They're written in something called FrameMaker. We have specialised publishing units where again staff need to be FrameMaker trained. The whole Hansard process and so on is those are the things that are slowing it down, not the number of committee rooms. It's personnel and equipment, but not really rooms. Rooms is probably bottom of the list of things which are a problem. It's still a problem, but they're not a massive problem.
Yeah, I'm just coming at this, I think, from the perspective of members of the committee. I think a few of us probably experienced a request to have pairings because the committee rooms aren't big enough.
Yes, and I tried to cover that a little bit in my earlier answer. I think you're right. That's where the box screening might come into play, because I think with box screening we can quite significantly increase the capacity of the rooms at the moment. And I think if you're getting the capacity up to sort of 17 or something like that, most build committees can operate, I think, very effectively with that sort of number. So I hope we'll be able to make some progress on that. I believe there is a national shortage of the perspex that's needed for this, not surprisingly, because any number of organisations are using it at the moment. But we're confident that we can put those physical arrangements in place. Do you want to say anything on that, Matthew? You've probably been following it more carefully.
Well, I think you've got yourself very well briefed, if I may say so. But I would just add on the virtual Public Build Committee, we started doing that, and thanks very much to you and other members who took part in our trial. I think that we didn't have, as it were, political direction to go on doing more work, and running two horses at once in case one of them was tipped to win was just beyond our resourcing. So we got a political direction to make socially distanced PBCs, and we focused on that. Obviously, most things can be achieved if you have enough time and enough people to throw at them, but on this occasion we didn't have any time and the people were pretty stretched already, so we focused on the one thing we knew that the usual channels had told us they wanted.
Thank you.
Now on to the virtual scrutiny proceedings, and I want to bring in Jack Brereton, please.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to ask a few other questions first, if I may, particularly with regards to social distancing that you were just referring to a minute ago. Obviously, yesterday we had quite a number of votes and some concerns were raised about how close colleagues were getting to one another and to members of staff. And that was raised with the leader earlier today. Do you have any concerns about that?
I do have concerns, yes. Because these are your colleagues and my colleagues, and as I say, apart from anything else, these things are picked up and people notice them, and staff say things to me, and members say this to me as well. The Speaker, I think, will be making an announcement today in the Chamber at some stage to say that members must observe social distancing. We're on our fourth different division system of 2020. We found that the latest system is delivering much quicker divisions, and we don't want to keep members hanging around unnecessarily, and we don't want to keep staff hanging around unnecessarily either. If we've got a sequence of half a dozen divisions, it can take a long time. But the assumption is that members will observe social distancing, and our timings are based on the completion of the division, but it is very difficult in practice for my colleagues to ask members to stand further apart. It is surely self-evident what 2 metres... We all should know what 2 metres looks like now. We've all spent half our lives at the moment 2 metres apart, and we would just ask members, and colleagues as well, I see colleagues huddled together sometimes, to observe it. The time has reduced quite significantly, it's worth saying. We've gone from 25 minutes under the new system to locking the door to 12 minutes today and last night. So the pressure has come down, and we'll have to see how that goes. But if that's aggravating, I don't believe it is, as a matter of fact, but if it was thought to be aggravating the situation, I'm sure the Speaker wouldn't hesitate to raise the time again.
There did seem to be quite an urgency to get colleagues through lobbies last night, and certainly, because of the amount of votes that we had, and I do think that did somewhat aggravate the situation.
Well, that's very helpful. I will reflect that back to the Speaker and deputies and report that back. That's very helpful. Thank you.
So moving on to the virtual participation, what level of participation and take-up have we seen so far with virtual participation in scrutiny proceedings?
I think on any 1 week, Matthew will correct me if I've got these figures wrong, I think around 100 members each week are participating virtually. That's the sort of rolling average.
And is that more or less than was the case when we were operating hybrid?
Oh, far fewer. I don't know what the average figure was when we were operating hybrid. We can find that out, but my belief is there are many more members participating physically. That's been my impression from being in the chamber throughout this period. But we can, if it's helpful, we can go away and do a sort of snap analysis of a week during hybrid and see how it differs, if you'd find that helpful.
Matthew.
I'd like to add one right to that. Obviously, when we were operating the fully hybrid proceedings, we were only sitting 3 days a week.
Yes.
But on the other hand, each day had more hybrid time in it, because everything you did was hybrid. So we probably want to look at what we're not quite comparing apples on apples, but we can certainly have a look. But I think for last week it was 108 members took part virtually. I think it was pretty much the same the week before. So a bit over 100 is the rolling average over the 4 sitting days.
Thank you.
Can I bring Bambos in before I come to Owen?
It's just something about yesterday. You mentioned about the timings. I know the Deputy Speaker reduced the timings for some of the votes last night.
Yes.
And I know some people were held in the queue and didn't vote, and then we had to, I think one member had a proxy and voted in 2 different lobbies.
That's allowed, and that has happened a few times. The proxy doesn't have to faithfully obey the person they're giving the vote to. That's permitted.
But it was just really about the timings.
The times, yeah. I think there was an issue. The doors having been locked were then subsequently unlocked. And there was a discussion at this morning in the Speakers' Conference to try and work out what's happened. There's a sort of investigation in progress. We need to make clear, I think, that where one queue starts, when one queue stops, this sort of thing. The Sergeant-at-Arms is all over this. They've worked really hard, I think. You'll have seen them in the queues trying to advise you on what the particular vote is on and where we are. I think we're so used to votes taking a long time, the fact that they're relatively quicker may be causing a little bit of confusion, but my impression is we're all getting used to it quite quickly and adjusting. But I do take away the point that's been made that possibly the 12 minutes is putting more pressure. I think the plan is 15 minutes for the first division and 12 minutes for subsequent divisions, on the basis that members should all be around the premises then. So you ought to be able to speed up a little bit on a subsequent division. But we can look at these timings and get reports from the doorkeepers and sergeants and see how it's shaping up.
I think yesterday in particular there was confusion about where one queue ended and another started, and certainly my observation, it is just an observation, is that members are starting to huddle as they wait to be able to rejoin a queue, and there isn't space for huddling, even in a socially distanced way. So I think that's where there are some problems, and I wonder whether there's something that could be done about knowing the end of a queue and then not letting more people into that queue and making them go into a different queue perhaps, and having one queue that was only for the first vote and another queue that then started
that's right,
second.
Karen. Chair, sorry, that's exactly what we're working on.
Yeah.
The sergeants are thinking of some sort of sign system, a bit like when you go on the Eurostar, you're in the queue for the 1700 train, not the 1900 train or whatever.
And I think it was just because of the way the queuing goes backwards and forwards in Westminster Hall, people weren't sure whether they were joining a new queue, joining an old queue. It was just very confusing yesterday. We will get used to it. And we know you're doing your best, so don't worry. This is constructive comments rather than anything else.
If I would add also, and I'm not saying this just because I'm on duty today and we have another 6 divisions to look forward to, one of the complexities is that often we don't know how many divisions they're going to be at a particular point and precisely what they're going to be on. So much of my conversations so far today have been about precisely which votes might happen when we get to sort of 10 to 9 this evening. And we're inching, but I know full well, because of how politics works, the 3 votes we think they're going to be might be completely different by 8 o'clock. And we can't really devise signage for that, as it were, saying this might or might not be Amendment 57. You know. As I say, we keep doing our best and we keep learning every time we do one, essentially.
It'll be very good when members know that it's Amendment 57 and know which way to go at that point. If we can go back to virtual participation, and Owen Thompson's got some questions about the self-certification process.
Just a really quick one at this stage, Chair, and it's really if there's any concerns about the way the virtual self-certification has been operating.
I would think there are a few teething problems, particularly in week 1. And I think some of those arose from members quite reasonably enough. Goodness knows, we all get confused because things have changed quite a lot, practically day by day. So I think in the first week there was a little bit of confusion between some members who hadn't quite worked out we were on a different basis than we were in the hybrid parliament, as it were. So I think there are a couple of instances of members thinking that it was kind of a matter of choice, that whether or not they participated virtually or physically, whereas in fact there are criteria laid down for self-certification based on a number of principles. We have a degree of flux every day, as you'd expect. People's circumstances change from day to day. They may need to self-isolate. The guidance may change in a particular jurisdiction or whatever. So we'd expect there to be a degree of flux. It causes quite a lot of work, I'll be honest. A lot of the work is in the Speaker's office. Managing all this stuff is quite hard. We notice occasionally there are members down for proxy voting and, as it were, to participate virtually and then still seeking to speak in the chamber, and that can't be right. That's specifically prescribed. But we've only had a couple of examples where we've needed to intervene. Normally you can clear it up. It's a mix-up very often. And I'd say on the whole, problems are diminishing rather than growing.
If I can add to that, specifically on the self-certification, the House gave the Speaker a pretty broad remit to manage that, and what he did was to make it in effect a sort of weekly thing. So you have a cut-off point. So at the end of, on a Friday, we have a kind of list of members who are signed up, who are self-certified for the following week. So that gives everyone, including the members, a bit of certainty. I think, if I can just add to what John said, there is a bit of an interaction which doesn't always quite work between virtual participation, which is set up under one resolution of the House and is managed in one way, with proxy voting, which was sort of piggybacked onto an existing resolution of the House, which was set up to do something else. And although they deliberately have very similar criteria for eligibility, they actually operate in very different ways. And I think members, perhaps, once again, not a really, may have thought, well, if you do what you ask for one, you get the other one. But also, the other complexity is that although one is managed on an explicitly weekly basis, because of the way the founding resolution for proxy voting works, it allows any member on any given sitting day to apply for a proxy vote or to give up their proxy vote with effect from the next sitting day. Now, obviously, when it was invented parental leave, which tends to be planned quite a long way in advance, and What you might extend it, or you might decide to come back a bit early, and just occasionally you'd want to suspend it because there's a major event in the House. But the numbers are very low, so the quantum of data we're trying to keep track of is very small. But we've now obviously increased that enormously to, I think, 173 proxy votes in operation. It's different every day, which is one point. And that is an additional overhead, which we try and manage, but people just not doing other jobs, essentially, to manage that.
And just to give you a sense of scale, there were two proxy votes, which are for parental care at the moment. Just so the scale is massively different.
And I think that's where, if I was asked, what would you like to, with the administrators, the bureaucrats tidy mine, what would you like us to tidy up? I think some way of bringing more consistency into the kind of management and assumptions behind the two schemes, at least while we're operating, for whatever reason, with a very large number of proxies. And I think that's as much to protect members as anything else, because I always worry that, in principle, to get a proxy vote, you assure the Speaker, who's issued a certificate which appears in the formal proceedings of the House, that you are unable to attend Westminster for a public health reason. And then you forget because it's the following week or something happens. And you might actually, you're there, if you're speaking in the chamber, or even theoretically, if you're just walking through Portcullis House, you've broken that undertaking, and I don't know what terrible sanctions might befall you. It's not a position we want members to be in, obviously. So we might, were this scheme to survive for any length of time, and I'm conscious you're undertaking an inquiry, have been for some time now, I think. That's an area to just the administrative management of numbers of proxy votes at this level.
It's the longest ongoing inquiry, perhaps, but Owen.
I'm conscious that also there were one or two teething problems where members had their proxy in place and hadn't actually necessarily appreciated they still had that in place when they were then attending for virtual sittings, and I'm aware of some who were in fact in the chamber to ask questions at the point at which that was spotted, and they were understandably asked to leave and weren't able to ask their questions. But I mean, would it be the plan to eventually merge the two together? I think the other element here, I suppose, has been the change, or what feels certainly like a change over the last week, where rather than having to self-cert on an ongoing weekly basis, it now appears anyway that a self-cert is an ongoing thing until it's notified differently. And I mean, I suppose it's when there's continual changes like that there's a potential for greater confusion for members.
And I feel sorry for you for having to, I mean, it's hard enough being a member, I imagine, without having to be aware of fast-changing rules. I suppose it's a fast-changing situation. It's a very dynamic situation in the country, and it's not surprising, part of that. I mean, I think it's plain common sense. If you have an underlying health condition, which means that you're going to require that throughout, it's a bit ridiculous constantly renewing it, because you'll just be saying the same all the time. So that seems to me very sensible. Could they come together? That's up to, well, you in the first instance, and the House presumably in the government's response to any report you make, and ultimately the House. I mean, it's worth saying that I hope I'm right in this, the proxy voting resolution expires at the moment on the kind of conventional one at the 28th of July. So I don't know. I'm not privy to the government's thinking on this. I imagine they will be looking to extend it, but at the moment they are different regimes. And I don't think I can really say whether or not the government would think it desirable to conflate them or not.
I think it obviously is a matter of your committee, the government, the House itself to decide how it wants to handle it. But I think whatever decisions are reached, I think having some working, if conceptually these arrangements are in place to allow members who can't be here to take part as far as possible and represent their constituents as much as possible. So if your conditions mean that you can't be here to vote, you need a proxy, they probably also mean you can't be here to do anything else. So there's a sort of logic in, if you were starting from square one saying how do we make arrangements with the colleagues in this position, you'd probably create a single scheme and says, well, you can't do these things because they're too important, they can only be done physically. These things you can do virtually, either through video conferencing like this or through another colleague having your proxy vote. And then you'd say, well, these are similar conditions, similar criteria apply, and you'd probably always need some kind of emergency break Because one of the odd things about proxy voting, and I'm sorry if I bored the committee with this before, is that at one level it's very rigid. During the course of a sitting day, in theory, you can't change your status, which is clearly that's madness because there's always going to be an emergency. And the Speaker has, I think, used his discretion on occasion. But it's quite nice that discretion was built into the system. But it's also incredibly flexible. So on any day of the week, you can notionally change your status. So bringing that a bit more into line with a default period, but with an emergency, a button you press in the case of emergency, when your circumstances very suddenly change, would be sensible. This is all very much dependent on longer term prospects for the pandemic, I guess.
I wonder if there's a way of having some notification system. So if someone gets a proxy vote, they apply for a proxy vote, they're successful, there's also a notification that says you will also have to apply to participate virtually. Because clearly if you're on parental leave, you may not want to participate virtually. You may want to actually have those first few weeks with your child, and the proxy vote enables you to have that proper time with your child without feeling the need to exactly apply to participate in a statement or an urgent question. But I wonder if there's a way that there could be some sort of notification.
Well, you could either do that, or I suppose the House could just resolve that if a member applies for one, they're automatically enrolled on the other. Because if you're deciding I'm on maternity leave or parental leave, it doesn't really matter what your status in terms of virtual or non-virtual is anyway. If you're not turning up.
No, exactly.
You could do either through resolution of the House or just mechanical. We can do things with out of office emails saying a bit like Amazon. I see you're interested. You've just bought a property vote. Would you be interested in also our other products?
Our other products. We believe you may be interested in. Bambos, I think you want to come in.
It's some proxies are frustrated by the inability to participate in general debates or in debates. And that's caused some confusion. That's made some people want to cancel their proxy. And I think that's led to the shopping changing for certain situations. So I think that's, it might be a technical issue, but I wasn't sure what the reason was behind not being able to participate in general debates.
Because of the resolution of the House,
yeah.
Which says you get, it's a trade. You say to the House via the Speaker, I cannot be in Westminster for these reasons, and the House, through the Speaker's certificate, says, OK, we'll give you this special access which other members don't have. So it's not, but because the starting point is I cannot be at Westminster, so you in effect said I can't do physical things in Westminster, so I can't take, and because virtual scrutiny proceedings stop after questions and statements, it's sort of baked into. It's a feature, not a bug, I'm afraid. And all that we can do is, at the moment, most business, for reasons which I know other members of the committee have raised, and there has had mixed notices, is planned rather further in advance. So we know usually on day one what the urgent question is going to be on day two. So, and that is time for a member to cancel their proxy vote for the next day, if it's flagged up. But it is a bit clunky. But then we only invented it about 5 minutes ago as a system.
Owen Thompson has one final point. Then I'm going to bring Gary Sambrook in, who wants to just ask about divisions. He has to go to a meeting. But if I can go to Owen first, and then we'll return to virtual participation after that. Owen.
Thanks, Chair. And it's really sort of following on from the points you were making. Obviously, for medical or parental leave reasons, it's pretty clear and can be planned well in advance. But obviously, some of the public health measures might be something that comes up particularly quickly. And I'm thinking here, mostly on a Monday, for example, where urgent question statements are effectively applied for in the morning and taking place in the afternoon. So the sort of the 1 day period can have quite a significant impact there if a member suddenly finds that the situation has changed pretty quickly. So it's just that some of these things that perhaps are catching people out. I totally appreciate the situation we're in, and it is so fast moving, but it's just how we can perhaps adapt to take account of these scenarios.
I mean, it's a fair point, isn't it? One of the dilemmas we face is how far ahead we plan, what resources we put into this, because a lot of this stuff is very expensive, to be honest. A lot of the virtual elements do trigger quite a bit of cost. And you could do a lot more. I mean, virtually you could have a much larger cast of members able to participate virtually and able to participate at shorter notice or able more spontaneously to intervene. But all of these things require technological solutions, require time and resources, often from people who are very stretched and in some cases haven't had a break for a very long time, frankly. And it's quite hard for me to judge sometimes the extent to which it's legitimate use of public funds to invest in something which at the moment the House hasn't shown it has the will to go in this particular direction, balancing that against the need to be resilient for changing circumstances and for the House choosing to go down a different route, or for the, a second wave of the disease or something like that. So we're making these judgments quite a bit at the moment and just trying to strike a balance.
Gary Sambrook.
Thank you. On the impact of social distancing on divisions, because I can't remember if it was last week or the week before, we had a 10-minute rule bill which was divided on, and the Speaker took 3 attempts to get a sufficient number of no's in order to call a division. However, the chamber was full, and so a lot of the people who voted no and were shouting no were outside in members' lobby and couldn't get into the chamber in order to shout no. And so if we're going to have social distancing at 2 metres for an extended period, is there anything that we can do to try and help so that, because in that situation we nearly ended up in the fact that we didn't have a division because those who wanted a division were out in members' lobby queuing up to vote.
I hadn't heard that actually.
Neither had I, and I think I may have been there. I remember I was sitting in the building when it happened. I don't know, John, if you want to add one comment on that, but not.
I don't know, I can't think of an easy solution to that, to be honest, because the point about restricting the cast list in the chamber is for public health reasons. I guess if there were members desperate to shout, you don't need many people to shout no to get a division, that's what I would say. So, just get a couple of them in there and we're fine. We need tellers.
Sore throat for the rest of the day.
Right. It points to an interesting point that things go wrong in unexpected areas. Most of the time, we can manage perfectly well, and then something odd happens. I'll give you a couple of examples. The SO24 provision requires 40 members to rise in their place to signify they want a debate to go ahead. And we had a request for an SO24 earlier on, but we do not have 40 members on one side of the chamber at the moment. They're not supposed to be there, and they're not there. So they hit upon the idea of using the galleries, which is perfectly okay. You can't speak from there by long-standing convention, but there's no reason why members couldn't. And that's where they went. That's one example of improvising in an unexpected way. Another more problematic one was an out-of-time statement that we had on the Leicester lockdown earlier this week. So originally, you'll remember, that statement was going to follow on from, I think, 2 UQs, which were granted. But then the Speaker was approached by the government, which is perfectly orderly, to ask that he gave leave for the statement to be made later in the day. Now, that's at the discretion of the chair, and he listened carefully to the arguments. To be honest, in normal times, it would have been a no-brainer. Of course, we'll go ahead. There were very good reasons, which was that the clearance at the highest level for the Leicester lockdown required authorisation and detail that the Health Secretary felt he could only give later in the day because it was obviously a fast-moving situation. So the Speaker had to balance the need for the House to have that information, which he very much wanted them to be given the best information so that the Health Secretary could be then interrogated. We had the practical difficulty that the extensive broadcasting team who are on standby and creating virtual call lists are not expecting to be working at 9 o'clock at night. And the notice they had for that was a very few hours. So the first message we had back on that was this was going to be really, really difficult, and we thought we probably couldn't do it, to be honest. And we'd not necessarily anticipated that. They're very rare out-of-turn statements like that. They don't happen often. And we need to think about that. We need to be ready for that to happen again. But it's just something we hadn't really thought about, I suppose, that they would come so late in the day. And of course, it's only on a Monday when they would come so late in the day. So, it was an unlucky combination. We made it, we got there. But it's just these odd things that get thrown up from time to time that we're not anticipating.
If I can add just very briefly, both on the initial point raised by member and that specific example. On the first point, I think it is ultimately always at the discretion of the chair to decide my opinion has been challenged, which is what the standing order requires. And it doesn't require a lot of members in the chamber. We had a 10-minute rule vote earlier today, and what it required was 10 members on each side really going for it, shall we say. So colleagues in the SNP backing up their man, and Mr. Bone and his colleagues giving as good as they got, and it was pretty clear from the Deputy Speaker that there was definitely an appetite for a vote. We didn't need any more than that. So, I wouldn't be discouraged, I'd say. On the point that John has just raised, if I may jump, because it raises a wider point, what was interesting about that was that we have a team of people who would normally be working in participation, showing visitors around, doing outreach. They've all temporarily transferred their loyalties to supporting the chamber. It's a really good example of moving your resource around where the demand is. And they've been working on that more or less. There's a team of 8 of them. And they've been working that more or less full time. And they were expecting to do the statement at about 5 o'clock, and very loyally said, okay, because they can work remotely, we'll all be back online to do it this evening, which is very good of them. That wasn't quite included in the package because they're incredibly loyal. So we pulled that together. But it was a slightly hairy moment. It's not just the technology, it's literally the people setting members up. And it raises the wider point which John has touched on when I bored the committee with before about planning. I'm authorising various, in themselves, modest amounts of money to ensure we can do something in September, which we may not be required to do. But I can't risk not being able to provide this service to the House while there's a possibility of it happening. And there's a huge amount of work which we sketched out with the committee before we met informally about how you can improve the model for more spontaneity, for really clever things like you could be making a virtual speech and get an alert that a member physically or virtually wants to intervene on you, almost like the hand raise feature. And we could just cue them in. You could work out ways of doing interventions on speeches either way round, as it were. So none of this is impossible. It just takes time. It's being explored increasingly in the Lords. And if we were told by the House next week, improve this product and expand it to 5 days a week and do everything, and we want that running by September, with a clear direction, we say, okay, we'll go and spend a lot more money again, and recruit the right people, and then we can deliver it. So nothing is ever impossible. The difficulty, as John says, with his accounting officer hat on, is how much do you commit to things that might not be dead end. It's a bit like making vaccines or making new medicines, where the first 199 you throw away, but you pay your dividends to your shareholders with the 300th one. And we're not quite operating at those numbers, but it does feel a bit like that sometimes.
But I think, the example is remote voting, and the House actually resolved to have remote electronic voting. A considerable amount of money was spent on developing it, and then it lasted for 8 days. So I can well understand that your concern about these things. I know Gary has to go. If I can bring in Nigel Mills, who's been a beneficiary of parental proxy voting.
And the COVID proxy voting, actually. I think we were just talking about the way to extend the virtual proceedings to debates as well. And it was pretty clear then that you could extend it back to debates and you could build in more spontaneity. The problem here is whether or not there's any demand for it, or whether the House is going to approve it at any point. But it technically could be done for September if we did want to.
And the proof of that pudding is not very far away in the House of Lords, which got off to a slower start in terms of virtual participation, but is now setting the pace. But yes, all these things are possible. They're not always easy. You have to think, for example, of virtual interventions against a virtual minister. Let's say it's not always physical versus virtual. It can get quite complicated. But I'm in no doubt that we could find technical solutions for any of these challenges if the will was there. But it's of course entirely for the House to decide what it wants to do. Matthew and I have no views on that.
You made the point earlier that virtual proceedings allow members that can't be present to represent their constituents and to do their job, but only to do part of their job. We can't take part in any debate or any legislation. So there would seem to be a compelling logic if we're going to have virtual participation to have it on everything rather than some things, wouldn't there?
Well, you're luring me into saying that I agree with your compelling logic, and I might not. There is an argument. There is a respectable. You are making a very respectable argument, but it's a decision for the House.
When would you want the House to have considered that in time for it to be available for September? Would that be soon, or could it be right before
the earlier the better. I mean, the earlier the better, because some of these things require development time, and one of the problems we face is that a relatively small number of people have been working incredibly hard for a long time. And one of the things I'm very hopeful is that they will get some time off in the summer, and that they won't spend their summer coming up with another solution and ask for it at very late notice. So early notice makes a huge difference. I think the broadcasting team and the digital team and procedural teams and all sorts of people have worked at pace now for a long time, producing consistently high quality work. Matthew referred to the help we'd had from visitor assistants in running the virtual operation. I saw a thank you note much earlier on in this piece, which was copied to 70 different people who'd been involved in that, and that's outside the core broadcasting teams. These are just volunteers doing huge amounts of work in parts of the organisation, and I guess, you know, it does frankly worry me a little bit how long we can keep going in some areas. There are some areas which are really under a lot of pressure and have been for quite a while. So, you know, we need the break that's coming up, and if there was a desire to broaden participation, which I really well understand. Sorry, I wasn't in any way being disparaging about that. I think it's an entirely respectable case that members would expect to participate in parliamentary proceedings. That's what you were elected to do, to represent your constituents, and you know, not represent your constituents in some things, not others. I completely understand that. But the greater the notice, the better, as far as we're concerned.
If I can just very quickly add that there's a colleague who I sat in one of the informal sessions called Clemmy Brown, who's been doing all the legwork making this happen. Incredibly brilliant, terrifyingly young colleague, who will undoubtedly be Clerk of the House one day. No, I've said that on the record now. I think we reckon. We asked her some of these specific questions, and I think talking to the broadcast team and talking to the technology guys, I'm not sure we could guarantee to have transformed everything by September, but we could certainly if there was a direction of travel, to do more in the autumn. You know, certainly, I think she said by October we'd have no limit on how many members might at any one time be able to participate virtually, for instance. So that's one metric about how you improve this. There are other things we can do, I think, just by stealing back from the Lords what they developed on the basis of our work around the interesting thing with the Speaker, to reintroduce what the Speaker used to have is, the famous free hits, when you're calling from opposite sides of the House and you've got lists of members who put in to speak, but they didn't quite match the political balance. So there are members who come to the chamber thinking, it's probably worth my turning up. It doesn't do any harm. And then there's in real time, the Speaker would sort of give you the nod. I've got a slot almost, and be able to do that kind of very spontaneous. And it's a point members have made to us. I think I was having a conversation with them the other day, who said, well, that's the bit they sort of miss, is to be able to jump in because something just suddenly caught your attention. And I think we could do work on that, because the Lords are moving in that. So you can not be on a call list and be virtual and still be pulled into the debate at the chair's discretion, which is a bit more like the old ways, as it were.
I think it might be useful for us to, as a committee, to see what the Lords are doing. Nigel, have you finished?
Finished, yes,
thank you. Liz Twist, I know, has to go. So, Liz, do you want to come in?
Yes, thanks very much. And I do just want to start by saying thank you to the staff, because, we're a bit obsessed by our own stuff. So I know the staff have to deal with whatever we throw at them in the end. So thank you very much to everyone. So I'd like to ask about the card voting system. how was it operated from a practical perspective in your view?
Well, Matthew knows more about it than I do, but I think pretty well is the short answer. It's quite a tough nut to crack, because the card reading system is a security system. Self-evidently, it's a security system, and it's a deliberately very locked down system. It's not a system that feeds into the parliamentary network. It sits outside that. It's a standalone system quite deliberately. So it is not straightforward extracting the data from it and turning it into the division list, the list of members who participated in any division, and then you've got the added complication of adding the proxy votes at the end. But that said, knowing its limitations, we introduced it reasonably quickly, I think. We did some useful pilot work and some useful testing, and we are getting the names off. It takes a good hour or more to get all the names out. This is an exact example of the sort of dilemma that Matthew was so well describing, of to what extent is it legitimate for us to invest more money in this area? Because if the House took the view that if we thought that card reading recognition of members in division lobbers was here to stay, and it has been mooted in the past as an alternative to division clerks, and from my perspective, not having to find 6 division clerks at any time of day or night that the House is sitting is a good thing, because all they are doing is literally mimicking what a card reading system would do, that is to say, recording the name of a member as they walk past. Then we would spend more money on it and produce an alternative, which would reasonably quickly, I think, mean you would get those names straight away. They would feed straight away into the app, which we were very familiar with, which gave the members of the public, as well as the whip's officers, the various names. It could be used for English votes for English laws if that was brought back into play. At the moment, the current system wouldn't work. So there are many advantages in having a bespoke card reading system that sits outside the security pass, which is designed for a very different purpose. But there would be cost for that. And to my mind, the House would have to decide that that's what it wanted to do. I can't just say, I'm fed up of giving you division clerks, there are your pass readers.
If I could just add to that, just in terms of our experience of the system to date, technologically, as it were, there has been no problem at all with the transmission of data from the member's security pass onto the pass reader to the readout, the report that's pulled off the system at the end of it. It is jaw-droppingly clunky at the back end, because we literally print off a great big Excel file, and then with the laptops we use to create divisions, colleagues will sit in a room and tap those names. It's literally re-entering the text to generate a list which, under the division system we were using up until March, you may remember, would generate that automatically in 20 minutes within 20 minutes of a division. We then also have to manually input all the notifications of proxy votes we've had, which is not all the proxy votes cast, as I'm afraid we've discovered, because some of them come in quite late. And so it is not, it's very labour intensive. And if we were going to, it does have the advantage in principle that the data itself is very accurately recorded in the first instance, but it's captured in a way which is really unhelpful. So as John says, my personal view is we could adopt something which the US Congress adopted as long ago as I think 1973, which is to give members a voting card, and they go to pass readers in their chamber, in the House of Reps, and record their vote during a 15-minute period. So it's taking the long view. It's not actually that radical. But I think it would be much better to do that from scratch rather than trying to piggyback it onto a system which is designed to do something completely different.
I think the leader, when we saw him earlier, was very concerned about the idea, though, that you would need to have your card in order that you could vote, and that shouldn't become a criteria for being able to vote, that you're carrying a identity card of some variety with you. So there will be.
Well, I mean, the House would have to design what kind of scheme it wanted, and advised by bodies such as the Procedure Committee. But I think a system which involves voting using a voting card where you didn't have to use a voting card would be, it would be typically British, shall we say, and bespoke. I won't be drawn on whether it would be a good or bad idea, but it certainly would be a feature which would be of interest.
Liz, did you have anything else?
No, I think the second question about the feasibility of the role of the division clerk has been answered, but it seems to me this is a question of tradition versus ease of use, and it's something that you can't decide, it's something the House has to.
You'll have to decide, but I would just say there is a cost in having division clerks, not just the human cost of them hanging around, but we do pay out of hours payments for division clerks in the evening, so we would actually save a bit of money, if I could say that.
Can I make one just final point on divisions, and that is about when we leave, because both division lobbies are coming out of the same place. There is inevitable bunching at the end, and I wonder whether it would be possible to create some sort of one-way system, because some people go off towards the library corridor, some people go back towards Portcullis House, some downstairs, some back, some go down towards Westminster Hall through the exit past the leader's office. All of this is confusing, and some people don't know whether they're on vote 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever it might be. If there was a clearer one-way system, perhaps, as we've got here, which is a very good entrance and exit system, it might make it easier for people, although it may make it more long-winded for people to get around, but between votes it might just make life easier.
I'll feed that back certainly to the people managing the queues. Thank you.
I just have one question which would have been put by other colleagues, but they couldn't be here, and it was about the call list system, which has been of, as you know, some controversy around it, partly because of the length of the call list system and then how many people actually get called, and also the notice periods. I think the key one being the need to put your name in on a Friday, when of course Fridays, even in this weird virtual world, are very much constituency days for members, and whether there could be some consideration given both to the length of the call lists and also to the notice periods that need to be given. And I appreciate the comments you made earlier about the late statement and the problem that caused, but I'm not asking for an answer now, but perhaps just some consideration as to what may be done to make it more streamlined.
Sure. If I just do the first one first on the length of list, Matthew's probably more up to date on notice periods. To be honest, they've changed a few times. I'm not sure I'm yet on the right one.
I think we're on that.
The length of list, I think fewer members are now dropping out. That's just my impression in the chamber. I mean, I'm there for the first part of proceedings when call lists on statements and UQs are there. It seems to me slightly people are getting the hang of whether or not they'll be there and when we'll be there. I think that one of the things the Speaker's office does is, and Speaker Hoyle from the get-go has been clear in the timings of statements and urgent questions. So rather than just, as his predecessor tended to exhaust as it were, the number. Most people who stood up got called under Speaker Bercow. Speaker Hoyle, I think, has quite deliberately said this statement will run for 45 minutes. Or this urgent question will run for an hour or whatever. And he is applying those same principles in determining the length of call lists. So call lists are different lengths because they're designed to last different lengths of time. And obviously there's a judgment there in trying to work out how popular a particular item is. But my impression is that the majority feedback from members has been positive, because you are terribly busy people who welcome just a tiny degree of certainty in your lives, as we all do, and that it's better to know that this is going to run for 45 minutes than hope you get in and wondering whether it's an hour or an hour and a half or half an hour or whatever. So the length is quite deliberately set, and there is an assumption that a few people will drop out. So they are tending to go, in my experience, roughly as long as it's predicted they will go. And actually having call lists, if anything, makes it easier to predict how long things will will go. I do appreciate that sometimes...
I think the issues around long lists going to short lists and people being told they may be on a list and then finding they're not.
So I think that was more of a problem before under the fully hybrid parliament than it is now, because I mean, I could be wrong, Matthew. Have you had problems like that in the afternoon?
The committee did suggest this issue might come on. I've not had a chance, I'm afraid, to discuss it in detail with Colin Lee, who has sent you a very detailed note on how all that works, and which I won't go through again. There was an issue to begin right at the beginning when we were doing this right back at the end of April, when we were not absolutely certain about how good the technology would be, because we'd not at that stage, as it were, virtually going to hundreds of members' front rooms or bedrooms or spare rooms. And so we deliberately made sure we had a good list of names, because several members just couldn't get through.
Yes.
We didn't want to sort of run out and deprive other members of the possibility. As I think the technology has got better on that aspect, we no longer need to do that. And I think the published call list has got shorter. Of course, if you decide to have a shorter call list, there are members who are not on the call list, so they'll be disappointed. If you have a very long call list, members will be disappointed there at the end of the call list. So, I mean, John and I worked here between ourselves for about 70 years and 10, and I've always heard members complaining variations of I've been sat in the chamber for 4 hours and I didn't get called. Yeah. Now you can at least look at a call list and say, well, I don't need to wait 4 hours to discover I'm not going to be called, because I'm clearly not going to be called. So I don't know if that's better or not. It's sort of, is trampling out hope worse for people than keeping the flame alive?
It's probably not as good for your thighs without the bobbing.
Without bobbing. I mean, well...
there are so many trade-offs, aren't there? What you gain in predictability and certainty, you lose in spontaneity and excitement. I've had friends who say, you may hear very different things. They say, I really like the calmness of the chamber. I think it's a very grown-up atmosphere for a very serious national concern. And then I get other colleagues who say, it all sounds a bit flat. I had someone suggest to me last week that this crowd noise that they're piping in on football games, that we should do something equivalent here in the chamber and just have some barracking piped in. So you have that option at home of improving the atmosphere. I don't know.
The solution on shouting I know in divisions, but I worry it might become a bit like North and South Korea, with increasingly large sound systems being smuggled in from each side.
I think the problem with the division last week, the 10-minute rule bill that Gary Sambrook was alluding to, was that was the one that was the free vote. And so it's not as easy as opposition and government shouting. It was a question of different people around the chamber having different views. But
really want to go behind the chair's judgment on, because each time it's a judgment call, in a way, particularly on free votes or a backbench new clause which has got cross-party support. But I tend to get the sense when you're in the chamber you can tell pretty quickly, this is genuine, this is not for
exactly.
show, and the chair is usually pretty good at picking that up. But I certainly wouldn't want a vote not to happen because we're not like we're counting how many people are shouting or how loudly they're shouting. I hope it's a bit more sophisticated than that, John.
So I'm conscious of time, but Chap Brereton wants to come in.
Thank you, Chair. And as I've mentioned to you before about the limitations currently on members, and particularly on backbenchers, with things like Westminster Hall not being possible, obviously one of the key ways that colleagues can influence the government is through in the voting lobbies and speaking to ministers about particular issues relating to their constituencies. And I certainly raised this issue with the leader today, and he recognised the deficiencies with the card operating system. So would you agree and recognise that the current system does have those deficiencies, and that we certainly shouldn't be going further that would limit the ability of colleagues and backbenchers to be able to put across issues that they need to ministers?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think this is a sort of an important argument in favour of physical divisions, is that these ministers are released from the captivity of their government departments, and they are prey in the lobby. You know where they're going to be and you know when they're going to be there. So I absolutely get that. I'm not sure that the pass reader in itself would prevent that. If you kept the pass reader, I think some of the arguments have got blurred a bit with the suggestion that you could put pass readers, I don't know, all around the estate. You know, that you could have a pass reader, which of course you could. You could have pass readers in Portcullis House and, Derby Gate or wherever members are, Norman Shaw, North and South. You don't, or on everyone's desk, I don't know. To me, you could still preserve the basic structure of a time-limited division in a particular locale, but have pass readers rather than humans recording your identities. Of course, as you'll know, the Procedure Committee, the actual count is the teller's count. That qualifies as the result of the division. The division clerks are there simply to record the names for Hansard, and that can feed into English Votes for English Laws separate counts as well. But I think
I'm not sure all members would necessarily agree with the comments that you've made there, because certainly from what the leader said earlier today, I recognise you haven't had the ability to see the evidence given yet, but he particularly suggested that the card reader system had the deficiencies that I've suggested, and particularly I think there would be concerns if this were to be permanent. Because, you know, what we don't want is that ministers are just flipping in and out, counting their cards. And
I see. I understand now. So you're sorry. I take your point. What you're saying, I think, and I hadn't grasped this, but I understand now. You're saying that actually the fact it gets rather slowed down, there is almost like a deliberate bottleneck round where the division clerks are, is when those ministers, they can't just slink through in the same way as they could. I understand that point now. Well, that's not a point I'd grasped. But what I can say is, I mean, this is not something that I would independently be able to do to you. The House would have to choose. There's a lot of sensitivity about how the House votes. There always has been. Pass readers have been looked at in the past and rejected. So it would be up to the House if it was fundamentally going to change any aspect of the division system. It's not something... We will implement whatever it is the House chooses to do. But I hadn't grasped that point, and I understand it better now. Thank you.
Just very quickly, that's a really clear point. I just wonder if one of the other reasons why ministers are not quite so predatable on at the moment is because everyone is being encouraged to move steadily and speedily at 2 metre distances very fast through the lobbies for public health reasons. So if that requirement vanishes, it might be that will bring together that clustering again. But once again, if you started from scratch and said, please design us a system which ensures that things slow down at the exits, so members can talk to each other and captain ministers who are trying to get through, you could do that. I don't think you always need 3 human beings ticking names off to generate that, but if this was a project, you'd say, okay, that's a very clear requirement. What do you need to do to make sure that requirement is met through whatever solution we come up with? But as John says, if the House comes to a view, we will make it work. Whatever that view is going back to what we've done before, we can do that as well.
Did Sir Christopher want to come in, or was that just movement on his screen? Oh, that's fine. Thank you. I am very conscious that we have kept you a very long time, and I fear that a division is about to come to interrupt us once again. So rather than letting it interrupt us, can I thank you once again for very comprehensive answers and answering all our questions. There is still an awful lot that we need to work on, but this has been very helpful in informing us. I think we do need to have a look at what the House of Lords are doing, because we've certainly had the invitation from the leader that if we could come up with a suggested proposal for more virtual participation, he would be willing to look at it. So I think we need to do that. But thank you once again for spending the time with us and your very helpful comments. And I'm sure we will speak again before we complete this inquiry. But if I can say thank you and order.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The idea